The reason I'm doing this podcast isn't because I just like talking about MH370. I honestly believe that we can solve this case. And I'm constantly thinking about ways that we can do that. What are the entry points in the mystery that we can attack? Think of a geologist who's got a nodule that he wants to break open with his hammer. He looks for cracks. He turns it over looking for weak points. Where can he strike that nodule to break it open? In the case of MH370, what are the parts of the story that are fuzzy, but which we could clarify if we knew a little bit more? Hi, everybody. Jeff Wise back with you. I'm very excited for today's show. I have a cool story, and I think it could really open a door to making real progress in this case. Before I get into that, though, I want to encourage people to subscribe here on YouTube and also to sign up for a subscription at the show page at findingmh370.com, because you'll get a free weekly newsletter that alerts you when each episode drops and also gives you some more information about each episode. If you want to, you can also sign up for a paid membership on the show page. It's such a huge help if you do that. And to sweeten the pot for you, paying members get exclusive early access to remastered first season episodes that I'm putting up every week. Finally, a different kind of appeal this week. I think that we're going to start to move into some really exciting stuff soon. And I wanted to ask for help from anyone who feels like giving it. If you have a skill that you feel like you could lend that would be useful for helping to make this investigation keep rolling along, I would love to hear it. Are you a whiz at TikTok or Instagram and feel like you could help make some social media posts? That would be fantastic. Are you a Michelangelo of computer animation? Again, please let me know. My email address is in the show notes here on YouTube. We've got some pretty cool plans in the works, and I'd love to make it an even more collaborative effort. All right, let's get right into it. I think that one of the big opportunities has to do with the pieces of debris that started washing up in the western part of the Indian Ocean starting in 2015, and especially the flaperon. In part because it was the most recent, and so it had the shortest route of drift across the ocean to backtrack, but also because it had a large and robust population of Lepas anatifera barnacles growing on it. And as I've talked about fairly often in this podcast, Lepas anatifera are extremely useful animals when it comes to understanding where a piece might have drifted through in the ocean. The shells of the Lepas anatifera are basically storehouses of information. They're like a natural data logger. But that data, like any scientific data, it's only useful if it's calibrated. And unfortunately, the calibration didn't exist, or it was very, very sparse when the pieces were originally collected. Because while there had been some research into the life cycle of the Lepas anatifera, there really just wasn't that much. It was very sparse, and some of it was decades old and had been collected in a completely different ocean and so forth. So scientists were really pretty much flying blind when it came to trying to understand what these Lepas anatifera barnacles were telling them. There have been a few studies that have happened in the meantime, but it's still pretty sparse. Among other things, researchers have tried to grow Lepas on buoys to see how fast they grow. And it's different from a floating object. When things float across the ocean, there's a certain flow of nutrients and current that helps them grow. So we can presume that they're similar, but I don't think they're the same. And what we really would want to have ideally is data collected from things floating from one part of the ocean to another. And that would give us the best measure of what Lepas growth is like. You'll remember in last season, I got pretty excited because I was able to find pictures of a boat that overturned off the northwest coast of Australia, drifted across the mid-latitudes of the southern Indian Ocean, washed ashore in Mayotte. And we're able to see, based on my fairly primitive photographic analysis that the barnacles growing on this boat were actually larger than what was found on the flaperon, even though they had grown for less time, presumably. So that was kind of a puzzle. But what if we had really robust data? What if we had barnacles that were collected from objects that we knew exactly where they had drifted, how long they'd been in the water, what the temperature of the water was, and we could see exactly how the growth of those barnacles correlated with the amount of time spent in the water and the temperature of the water? Well, it turns out that there's a ton of data that's out there that's just waiting to be collected. And I'm referring to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Global Drifter program, which has deployed over 1,000 of these drifter buoys, which we've talked about before. And they are constantly floating around in the ocean, and they are transmitting every hour their location and the water temperature and the barometric pressure. And they are presumably also, every single one of them, growing marine organisms on it. And so we have this absolutely colossal data set. And all you have to do is go and take some barnacles off any of these drifters, see how long they are, maybe collect some. You can send them in for chemical analysis, and that can tell you even more about how growth and chemical composition correlates with water temperature. So fantastic. Nobody's done this. Nobody's collected it. And frankly, I think it's something that we can do. Now, there's one massive problem, which is a lot of these things are in the middle of the ocean. And unless you have the millions of dollars necessary to run a marine research vessel, how are you going to get it? Well, I think there are some answers to that, and I will be addressing that in episodes to come. But for today, I want to refer to an idea that Andy Sabrandi had come up with when I talked to him about equipping a flaperon with telemetry. And he suggested that actually, after I talked to him, he emailed me and he said, oh, by the way, there's this drifter. I've talked about this 2 episodes ago, that he had data on a drifter that had washed ashore on the coast of Madagascar, had been carried across the island to the far shore on the western side, and was sitting at what was apparently a fisheries research organization. So I reached out to that organization. I said, hey, you've got this drifter. Can I look at it? And they were like upset. The person I was communicating with, was emailing with, said, we don't have it. What are you accusing me of? I think this person thought I was accusing them of stealing. Anyway, it didn't go anywhere. Anyway, I think by the time a drifter has been out of the water that long, it probably doesn't have any barnacles on it anymore. These things do tend to die and dry up and fall off. Anyway, it did get me thinking. I thought, well, we don't have to go to the middle of the ocean if we can just wait till one of these things comes ashore. Ideally, not quite to shore, but maybe close to the shore, and someone can go out with a boat and grab it. Because once they come ashore, things start to eat them or pick them or whatever. So Keely and I were on the lookout. There's a web page, which I will put in the show notes, where you can go and watch pick arbitrarily any one of these drifters, and you can watch it go across the ocean. You can see where it's been. You can sort of see what the tendency is, where it seems to be heading. It's actually pretty fascinating because these things are truly random. Some of them travel quite fast from here to there. Some of them go around and around. Some have been going around and around in the middle of the Indian Ocean for years. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if there's pieces of MH370 still going around and around, assuming it did crash in the ocean. So we looked for pieces that looked interesting, and Keely alerted me to one that was just then in the process of drifting up the coast of Kenya. And it was about 3 miles or 5 kilometers off the shore, and it was heading up northwards at a pretty steady clip. And this got me very excited. Even though it was a holiday weekend, I was like, I have to find somebody who can grab this thing for us. So I looked on Google Earth, and I found that there was a boat tour operator with a pin on the map really close to where this thing was that does tours to the nearby marine reserve. It's called Malindi Marine Boat Excursions. And I reached out to the owner on WhatsApp. He wrote me back by email. And he sounded quite excited to go out and get this thing. Unfortunately, this thing really was moving along at a clip. And by the time I was able to give him the lowdown on what exactly this thing was and why I was interested, it had already moved up the coast like 10 miles and it was heading away from him at a rapid clip. And it just seemed like it was too much. It was going to be too much trouble. However, I started to think, okay, what's the next stop? Where's this thing going to go next that I can start to make plans to pick it up? And there's a fairly famous resort on the coast called Lamu. And I started to reach out to people and say, does anybody know anybody in Lamu who might be able to grab this thing? Before I got anywhere with that, I noticed on this tracker website that the piece had stopped. It was stuck in an eddy only about 10 miles past Malindi, and it was going around and around and around. So I looked further south from Lamu and I found a really cool sounding hotel on the coast, a place called Cheshala, which is a windsurfing resort run by a third generation Kenyan named Justin Anyeri. This is the amazing thing about life in the 21st century. So I used a website that's collecting data from a satellite from thousands of drifters scattered all across the ocean, some of the most remote places on Earth. And I was able to see a particular drifter. I was able to tell where it was going. I was able to use Google Earth to find a resort. I was able to use WhatsApp to call the resort. And within a minute, I was talking to Justin Anyeri. And a fascinating guy. I want to just read you from the resort's website what this place is about. It's called Cheshala. Cheshala was started by Johnny and Vanessa Anyeri in the late 70s. Your host, Justin Anyeri, is one of their 3 children, and he took over Cheshala in 1999. Originally from Scotland and Spain, the family has been in Kenya for more than 100 years. Justin writes, my parents spent several years in the bush running a mobile hunting camp in Kenya from the time my sisters and I were toddlers. In the late 70s, we moved to the huge stretch of completely deserted beach we call Cheshala today. We arrived with our safari tents and set up our camp right on the beach and started to build bandas. From the late 70s to early 90s, Cheshala was well known for its lavish seafood lunches, windsurfing, fishing, and ultimate seclusion. Cheshala had become a bit of a jet-set hideaway with a few celebrities such as Richard Burton coming here to seek privacy. Today, my family and I live on site together with our team. It is a pleasure to share our little slice of Kenyan paradise with you. Okay. I will definitely, if I can wrangle a way to go to this place, I will. It sounds amazing. So I reached out to Justin. We had a conversation. We started sending information back and forth via WhatsApp. And I was showing him where the drifter was going. Every hour I was getting a ping and I could see where it was going. Unfortunately, this data was like 3 or 4 hours old. So it was a little frustrating because as the thing is going around and around in a circle, you don't really know where it is next. So the long and short is that in the middle of the night, my time, early morning, his time, the piece goes ashore. It washes up onto this long stretch of beach about 5 miles from where Cheshala is. And so Justin is a busy guy. He doesn't have time to be traipsing all over the place just because some random person from America sends him a message on WhatsApp. But he was very generous. He sent out one of his employees and they went to the beach and they came back and they said it wasn't there. And in the meantime, I'm looking at the pings from this object and it's moving inland. So it looks like somebody has grabbed it. Justin himself piles up his family into his Jeep and they head off. These are all dirt roads and he heads off into the wilderness and he winds up at the spot on the beach where it washed up and he can see the marks where the buoy was, where the drogue ropes attached to it were.
Looking from these tracks, looks like it dragged in. So here you can see the dip here. And some people have come and picked it up. So let's hope we get another ping and I'll go and find it in the villages. Pissing with rain here. Yeah, it's definitely been picked up.
And footprints leading off into the interior. So using my data where the pinger is showing me where it is, I direct him to go to this, basically a field in the middle of nowhere. He goes there, it isn't there. And again, all of this data is 4 hours old. So it comes to find that somebody has taken it and walked, or however they've traveled, however, another couple miles. And now they're at this Italian space center. Yes, there's an Italian space center near this completely wild and remote stretch of Kenyan coast. But then it moves back and it goes back to its original location. So Justin has to go back to work. He's got to get on with his business of running this windsurf lodge, kite surfing lodge, sorry. And he says, okay, we'll just have to keep our ears open. So come to find, a couple of days later, he puts out word among the locals and he says, listen, I'm looking for this buoy. It's mine. Please return it to me. And so the person who found it originally brings it into him.
So, Jeff, the person who actually found it is the person who brought it to me. He's a guy that has known me for years, also his associates, just fishermen. I asked him about the barnacles and said, yeah, it was full of barnacles, but they washed it off and so on and so forth. And they realized that it's just not any kind of buoy that's floating around the ocean. It's something serious. So they took it to the village, and then some other local guy actually stole it from them and took it to a place called Ungomeni, which is hence it moving around the place. They were trying to sell it to some other people, of which the guy who found it, he then followed it again and went and got it back. And then obviously today decided to bring it to me. He brought it to the hotel knowing that I was looking for it because I'd left word to some villagers on the beach there where we went looking for it. But unfortunately, all the barnacles were washed off in the sea. So it's squeaky clean. So it's going to be a bit hard to get any story of barnacle data or anything like that. But it's back in my hands. Mission accomplished so far.
And so Justin was able to send me a picture of him triumphantly holding this object that we had been tracking from space, essentially. And bear in mind, I am just a random person. I have no affiliation with NOAA. I have no official link to these drifter program in any way. But this is just what happens when data is publicly available. People can use it to try to extract scientific value from something that was not intended to be used for this purpose at all. Drifters are not meant to be used to study the growth patterns of Lepas anatifera. But, if you're determined enough, you can find data where it is. So I think so in a way this was frustrating, but in a way it was exciting to me because we demonstrated that it is possible in real time to use this tracking data to locate drifters that seem like they can be obtained relatively painlessly and inexpensively, and data can be got. And in the days since that happened, another drifter came ashore in the Comoros Islands. I wasn't on top of that one. It's now in the middle of a forest somewhere. I think it's too late to get barnacles, but I'm tracking others. And if readers and listeners and viewers are interested, you guys could help me track ones that seem of interest. As I say, I'll put the websites that have this tracking data on the show page, and you can go look for yourself. There's a couple that are near Australia that I think would be interesting. One's on the Pacific side, but I think it would still yield relevant data about barnacle growth. There's a couple that are more in the western part of the ocean. They're not as near to coming ashore, but you never know. Sometimes these things can go around and around circles for months and then all of a sudden just zip off somewhere else. So it's a little hard to track. But so we can get this calibration data. And what it will do is solve some of the big mysteries that exist around the flaperon. I did a couple big episodes last season about the discrepancy between how big these barnacles are that were found on the Reunion flaperon and how big they should be. It seems like they're only a few months old. Now, there are some possible explanations for this. Maybe this part of the ocean is nutrient poor, so the organisms don't grow that quickly. It might be that when these sometimes objects, when they're floating through the ocean, get predated, like maybe a sea turtle comes and eats off all the adult Lepas anatifera barnacles, so it has to get recolonized. We will be able to tell if that's the case if we have a population of drifters that we've been able to study. If we get 10 drifters and they all have barnacles that are 5 centimeters long compared to the 3.6 on the reunion flaperon, that will tell us that there's something deeply fishy about the reunion flaperon. I mean, presuming, of course, that they're about the same age or younger than the flaperon. Another thing they could tell us is if we get 10 drifters and half of them have barnacles that don't match how long we know they've been in the water. Like if they're significantly smaller and presumably significantly younger, that would suggest that indeed this kind of predation happens all the time. If they all show similar size barnacles, on the other hand, that would suggest that that hypothesis is incorrect. And so we will have a really rock solid collection of data that will serve to calibrate what we find on the reunion flaperon. And I want to point out that it's taken me a while to think about doing this, but there's been no effort on the part of the authorities to calibrate the data because from their perspective, there is no question. Whatever the size the barnacles are, they were in their minds, they believe with 100% confidence that this must have gone in the water at the 7th arc. And if it's too small or the chemical composition is wrong or the distribution of the barnacles on the piece doesn't make sense, there must be a perfectly good explanation. In my mind, that mindset is really the opposite of what a scientist should have. Scientists need to be open to the possibility that their hypothesis is wrong. And they should look for evidence that will be determinative one way or the other. And so that's what we're going to do. I find that really exciting. So on the one hand, this is a story of failure in that somebody else by bad luck got to that flaperon. Somebody else got to that buoy before we did, but we came so close that I frankly have to find that encouraging. So that's the story. Let me know in the comments if you think I am completely nuts for finding this story encouraging. And also, if you think it's encouraging too, then join me and let's find some more. Let's find some more pieces and figure out how we can get our hands on them. There is much more. This is just one piece of the effort to get this calibration data and really try to understand in a determinative way how that flaperon came to be on Reunion Island when it got there. There's a lot of questions to be answered. This is that area where things are fuzzy, but we can shine a clarifying light without too much effort. This is what I love about this case. It's incredibly complicated. It's arcane. It's baffling. Millions and millions of people care deeply about it. And if we just use our noggins, I think we can find that crack in the geode that will allow us to just whack it right open and see the little glittering crystals on the inside. So on that note, I will wrap up the main part of the discourse for now. I will say once again, please sign up for that newsletter on the Substack show page, and if you pay a little extra money, you get early access to our remastered and re-edited first season content, which is getting better and better. I think it's funny to look at it again with fresh eyes. I think we've come a long way, but there's some really good information in those early episodes too. So without further ado, I will sign off. This is Jeff Wise saying, don't stop looking and don't stop asking hard questions. I will see you next time. So long.